Everyone has a last sentence. For most people, no one is standing there writing it down. For the men and women in this video, someone was. They spent years walking toward one small, tiled room, and when the warden asked the question, each of them picked something to say. Some apologized, some sang, some spit venom at the state, some refused to speak. Today, we are looking at 20 of them, and the words they picked to be their last. Ted Bundy.
Then and there unlawfully enter or remain in a structure located at 661 West Jefferson Street, the dwelling of Kenneth.
Between 1974 and 1978, Ted Bundy killed at least 30 young women across 7 states. His method was consistent, clean-cut, charming, well-spoken. He would wear a fake cast or a sling and ask a woman in a parking lot for help carrying books to his Volkswagen Beetle. He had removed the passenger seat so a body could fit on the floor. His confirmed victims include Linda Ann Healy and Jorgan Hawkins from the University of Washington in Seattle, Denise Nasland and Janice Ott, taken from a public beach at Lake Sammamish on the same day in July 1974, and Melissa Smith and Laura Aim, both teenagers, in Utah. Many were left on the same rural hillside in Taylor Mountain, Washington, where Bundy returned to visit the bodies for weeks afterward. He was arrested twice and escaped both times. The first was through a courthouse library window in Aspen, Colorado, in June 1977. The second was through a hole he sawed in the ceiling of his cell in Glenwood Springs 6 months later. He fled to Florida. On the 15th of January, 1978, he broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University and killed Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy in their beds, then attacked 2 other sisters in the same building. 3 weeks later, he abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her middle school in Lake City. Her body was found in an abandoned pig shed. He was executed by electric chair at Florida State Prison on the 24th of January 1989.
And by the authority of the state of Florida, the grand jurors of the state of Florida impaneled and sworn to inquire and true presentment make in and for the county of Leon upon their oaths do present that Theodore Robert Bundy.
His last words were, "I would like you to give my love to my family and friends." John Wayne Gacy.
Relaxation for me. I enjoyed entertaining kids. In the clown makeup, I regressed into childhood. It was fun being a clown because you could be yourself or just let yourself go and act a fool.
John Wayne Gacy killed 33 boys and young men in and around his home in Norwood Park Township, Illinois, between 1972 and 1978. 26 victims were buried in the crawl space under his house on West Summerdale Avenue. 3 more were buried on the property. When he ran out of room, he dumped 4 bodies into the Des Plaines River. He lured young men from bus stops, job sites, or the Bughouse Square cruising area in Chicago with construction work or money for sex. Once inside, he would demonstrate a handcuff trick, get the victim locked in, then rape and strangle him with a rope and dowel. By day, he was a successful contractor, a Democratic precinct captain, and a member of the local JCs. He dressed as Pogo the Clown at children's charity events. His youngest confirmed victim was 14-year-old Samuel Stapleton. The case that exposed him was the disappearance of 15-year-old Robert Peast, who told his mother on the 11th of December, 1978, he was leaving his pharmacy shift to speak with a contractor about a summer job. That contractor was Gacy. Investigators noticed a smell coming from the crawl space during a search of the house on December 21. 8 of the victims have never been identified. Gacy spent 14 years on death row, painting clown self-portraits that sold for thousands. He was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center on the 10th of May 1994. Gacy's last words are reported different ways. The Associated Press quoted Illinois Corrections Director Howard Peters saying Gacy called the execution the state murdering him. The version repeated most across outlets and books is, "Kiss my ass." Aileen Carol Wuornos.
She gave no indication that she would plead no contest to 3 murder charges, instead talking about dropping her public defenders.
Between November 1989 and November 1990, Aileen Wuornos shot 7 men dead along the interstate highways of Central Florida. She worked as a sex worker at truck stops and roadside bars. She picked her clients from parked rigs and drove into wooded areas with them. She killed each one with a .22 caliber revolver. Her victims were Richard Mallory, David Spears, Charles Carskadden, Peter Seams, Troy Burris, Charles Humphreys, and Walter Antonio. Seams's body was never found. Mallory was a 51-year-old electronics store owner from Clearwater. Burris was a 50-year-old sausage delivery driver whose truck was found abandoned on Highway 19. She initially told police her victims had tried to rape her. That defense collapsed under later interviews, but it fixed her public image as a woman driven to violence.
Troy Burris, case number 91-304. I sentence you to death for the murder of Charles Humphreys.
Her childhood set the stage. She was abandoned by her mother, raised by an abusive grandfather in Michigan, gave birth at 14 in a home for unwed mothers, and gave up the child. She was homeless by 15 and hitchhiking the highways. She was arrested on the 9th of January, 1991, at a biker bar in Port Orange called The Last Resort. Her girlfriend, Tyria Moore, agreed to record phone calls to secure a confession. She was sentenced to death on 6 of the murders and pleaded no contest to the 7th. Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison on the 9th of October 2002.
Yeah, and I got to come clean that I killed those 7 men in first-degree murder and robbery.
Her last words were, "I am sailing with the Rock, and I will be back like Independence Day, with Jesus, June 6, like the movie, big mothership and all. I will be back." Timothy McVeigh. At 9:02 a.m. on the 19th of April, 1995, a rented Ryder truck packed with 4,800 pounds of ammonium nitrate, fertilizer, and nitromethane detonated in a loading zone outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City.
Well, am I pure evil? Am I the face of terror sitting here in front of you? Or am I able to talk to you man to man?
The blast tore the front third of the 9-story building off. It killed 168 people, including 19 children, in a second-floor daycare center, and wounded 684 more. The bomber was 27-year-old Timothy James McVeigh, a Gulf War veteran from Pendleton, New York, and a decorated Bronze Star recipient. He picked the date on purpose. April 19 was the 2-year anniversary of the FBI raid on the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, which ended with 76 people dead. McVeigh had traveled to Waco during the siege in 1993 and handed out anti-government literature to reporters. He built the bomb with Terry Nichols on a farm in Kansas, mixing the fertilizer and racing fuel in plastic barrels loaded into the truck. He was arrested 90 minutes after the explosion by Oklahoma State Trooper Charlie Hanger on Interstate 35 near Perry. Hanger pulled him over for driving without a license plate and found a concealed .45 caliber Glock.
I couldn't say what it was.
The war in Iraq left McVeigh feeling confused.
At his federal trial, he never denied the bombing. He called the daycare deaths collateral damage. McVeigh was executed by lethal injection at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, on the 11th of June, 2001. He declined to make a verbal statement. Instead, he left a handwritten copy of the 1,875 poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley, ending with the line, "I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul." Carla Fay Tucker. At 3 a.m. on the 13th of June, 1983, Carla Fay Tucker and her boyfriend Daniel Garrett broke into a Houston apartment to steal motorcycle parts. She was 23 years old and had been awake on a mix of speed, heroin, and alcohol for 3 straight days. Inside the apartment,
God said He desires mercy over sacrifice or over the law. And there should always be a place for mercy.
Was Jerry Lynn Dean, a man she had a personal grudge against, and his girlfriend, Deborah Thornton, who was hiding under a sheet. Carla swung a pickaxe into Jerry 28 times. She struck Deborah 20 more. She was 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed just over 100 pounds. She was the daughter of a Houston longshoreman and a woman who had also worked as a worker. She had been introduced to marijuana at age 9 and to heroin by 12. In taped conversations with a friend played at trial, Carla said she experienced arousal with every swing of the pickaxe. That statement fixed the jury's verdict. While waiting for trial, she became a born-again Christian. She married a prison minister by proxy in 1995 while sitting on death row.
I'm going to be thankful for all of the love. Probably wishing there was a way I could give everybody a hug.
Pope John Paul II asked Texas to spare her. Pat Robertson and Amnesty International joined. Even Deborah Thornton's brother asked for mercy. Governor George W. Bush refused the reprieve. Tucker was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit on the 3rd of February, 1998. She was the first woman executed in Texas since the Civil War. Her last words were, "I am going to be face to face with Jesus now. I love all of you very much. I will see you all when you get there. I will wait for you." Ángel Neves Diaz. Ángel Neves Diaz was born in Puerto Rico in 1951 and served a prison sentence there for a 1,963 murder committed at age 17. He escaped from prison in Puerto Rico. In 1981, he escaped again from the Hartford Correctional Center in Connecticut by holding one guard at knife point while beating another. He fled south to Miami. On the 29th of December, 1979, he and 2 accomplices robbed the Velvet Swing, a topless bar on Biscayne Boulevard in Miami. Employees and patrons were herded into a bathroom. The manager, 42-year-old Joseph Nagy, was shot once with a silencer-equipped pistol inside a back office. No one saw the shooting. A dancer who hid under the bar heard the gunshot but could not identify the shooter. Diaz was convicted almost entirely on the testimony of a jailhouse informant named Ralph Gajus, who claimed Diaz had mimed the killing for him inside a Miami holding cell. Because Diaz spoke very little English, he defended himself at trial through an interpreter. His ex-girlfriend, Candy Rios, later came forward and named Gajus as the actual shooter. Florida courts refused to reopen the case. Diaz spent 27 years on death row. He was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison on the 13th of December, 2006. The execution team pushed the IV needles through the veins in both arms and dumped the drugs into the surrounding tissue. It took 34 minutes. Governor Jeb Bush halted all Florida executions the next day. His final statement, delivered partly in Spanish, translated as, "The state of Florida is killing an innocent person. The state of Florida is committing a crime because I am innocent." Stanley Tookie Williams. In 1971, at age 17, Stanley Williams and a friend named Raymond Washington folded a handful of street crews in south-central Los Angeles into a single gang they called the Crips.
We can put an end to this cycle that creates deep pain in the hearts of our mothers.
By the end of the decade, the Crips had become the largest street gang in the United States. They marked their territory in blue. Between February 28 and the 7th of March, 1979, Williams committed 4 robbery murders that put him on death row. His first victim was Albert Owens, a 26-year-old 7-Eleven clerk in Whittier. Williams told Owens to lie face down in a storeroom and shot him twice in the back with a 12-gauge shotgun. The take was $120. 6 days later, he entered a small family-owned motel in South Los Angeles and killed 76-year-old Yenai Yang, his wife Tsai Shai Yang, and their 43-year-old daughter Yi Chen Lin. The 3 were shot at close range with the same shotgun. Williams was arrested 5 weeks later. 2 accomplices testified against him,
waiting execution for robbing and murdering 4 people.
He spent 26 years on San Quentin's death row. During that time, he renounced gang life, wrote 9 children's books warning kids away from gangs, and was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 5 times. He never confessed to the 4 murders. Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger denied clemency on that basis. Williams was executed by lethal injection at San Quentin State Prison on the 13th of December 2005. The execution team spent 12 minutes searching for a usable vein in his left arm. Growing visibly frustrated, he lifted his head off the gurney and said his last audible words, "Still can't find it?" John Allen Muhammad. For 22 days in October 2002, John Allen Muhammad and his 17-year-old accomplice, Lee Boyd Malvo, shot 13 people at random in the Washington, D.C. area. 10 of the victims died. They killed James Martin in a Shoppers Food Warehouse parking lot in Wheaton, Maryland, James Buchanan, a landscaper mowing grass in Rockville, Sarah Ramos, sitting on a bench outside a post office, Lori Ann Lewis Rivera, vacuuming her minivan at a gas station, Pascal Charlotte, an elderly cabinet maker, crossing a street. They fired at people pumping gas, waiting for the bus, and one 13-year-old boy named Iran Brown walking into his middle school in Bowie. Brown was hit in the chest, but survived. The shooter was inside the trunk of a 1990 Chevrolet Caprice with a hole cut into the metal above the license plate. The rifle was a Bushmaster XM15 223. Muhammad was 41 years old, a Gulf War veteran from Baton Rouge who had lost custody of his 3 children to his ex-wife Mildred in 2000. Investigators believe the spree was cover for a plan to shoot Mildred and take the children back.
Williams strove to be a dedicated family man. The degree his life would disintegrate would shock everyone who knew him.
The 2 were caught asleep at a rest stop off Interstate 70 in Myersville, Maryland on the 24th of October 2002 after a trucker spotted the Caprice. Muhammad was sentenced to death for the murder of 53-year-old Dean Harold Myers, a Vietnam veteran shot at a gas station in Manassas, Virginia. He was executed by lethal injection at Greensville Correctional Center on the 10th of November 2009.
Was very emotionless. He watched a bit of the procedure that was being done on him. But after that was completed and the curtains were opened back up, he had his head tilted slightly to the right and his eyes were closed, and that's the way he remained.
Asked for a final statement, he refused to speak, refused to blink, and did not acknowledge the room. Danny Rolling. Between August 24 and the 27th of August 1990, Danny Rolling killed 5 University of Florida and Santa Fe Community College students in their off-campus apartments in Gainesville. Sonia Larson, 18, and Christina Powell, 17, were roommates at Williamsburg Village Apartments. He entered through an unlocked back door and killed both while they slept. Krista Hoyt, 18, was killed in her one-bedroom duplex the next night, then decapitated. Her head was placed on a bookshelf so the responding officer would see it first. Manny Taboda, 23, and his roommate Tracy Powles, 23, were killed on the last night. Rolling raped the female victims and posed the bodies for maximum shock value. He wanted the police to find the scene exactly the way he left it. He was 36 years old, a drifter from Shreveport, Louisiana. His father was a Shreveport police officer who beat him with steel-toed boots and once told a doctor he wished the baby had been stillborn.
They've all told me they promised that they won't tell anyone. They're just going to ask you how the food is here.
Rolling was already in custody for an unrelated grocery store robbery in Ocala when DNA connected him to the Gainesville murders. He also confessed to killing an entire family in Shreveport in November 1989. William Grissom, 55, his 24-year-old daughter Julie, and Julie's 8-year-old nephew Sean. Screenwriter Kevin Williamson used the Gainesville killings as inspiration for the 1996 movie Scream. Rolling was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison on the 25th of October 2006. Asked for a final statement, he sang for 2 full minutes.
I recall the day I first saw you. I reached out to say I love you.
The chorus of the gospel song he wrote for himself was, "None greater than thee, O Lord, none greater than thee." Angel Maturino Resendiz. Between 1986 and 1999, Angel Maturino Resendiz killed at least 15 people in the United States by jumping freight trains across the border and targeting homes near railroad tracks. He was born in Puebla, Mexico, in 1959 and had been crossing on trains since he was a teenager. He learned which cargo cars ran through which American cities. He spent nights in Mexican freight yards and days hunting isolated houses in Kentucky, Texas, Illinois, and Florida. His method involved watching a target house for hours from nearby brush, entering around 3 a.m. with a heavy object picked up on the property, and killing whoever was inside. He used a sledgehammer, a pickaxe, and an antique iron he pulled off a fence. Dr. Claudia Benton, a 39-year-old pediatric neurologist from West University Place, Texas, was killed in December 1998 in her bedroom. Karen Cernick, a pastor's wife in Weimar, Texas, was killed with her husband Norman when Resendiz entered their parsonage next to the tracks in May 1999. 80-year-old George Morber and his 51-year-old daughter, Carolyn Frederick, were killed together in Gorham, Illinois, 5 days later. Resendiz surrendered at the Zaragoza International Bridge in El Paso on the 13th of July 1999 after his sister negotiated with a Texas Ranger. He was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit on the 27th of June 2006. His last words were, "I want to ask if it is in your heart to forgive me. You do not have to. I know I allowed the devil to rule my life. I do not deserve to cause you pain. You did not deserve this. I deserve what I am getting." Ronnie Lee Gardner. On the 9th of October 1984, Ronnie Lee Gardner walked into the Cheers Tavern in Salt Lake City and shot 37-year-old bartender Melvin John Otterstrom in the face during a robbery. The take was less than $100.
I think there was a time when I couldn't stop. I think something in my brain would not allow me to stop the behavior that...
6 months later, on the 2nd of April, 1985, Gardner was in a courthouse in Salt Lake City for a preliminary hearing on the Otterstrom murder. A friend had smuggled a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol into the building and hidden it in a public bathroom. Gardner grabbed it in the holding area. He shot bailiff George Nick Kirk in the stomach, ran into the corridor outside the courtroom, and shot 36-year-old attorney Michael Burdell in the face. Burdell had walked into the courthouse that morning to help a friend with a divorce hearing. Gardner tried to escape through a loading dock, but was shot in the shoulder by a corrections officer.
Petition for a stay Thursday. An appeal is still pending before the U.S. Supreme Court. and Gardner has also asked Utah's governor for...
Kirk survived the shooting but suffered lasting internal injuries and died 11 years later from complications tied to the wound. Burdell's family opposed the death sentence and asked for it to be commuted. Gardner was 24 years old at the time of the courthouse shooting. His criminal record started with shoplifting at age 6 and included previous armed robbery convictions in Oregon and Utah. He spent 25 years on Utah's death row. When his execution date came, he picked the firing squad over lethal injection.
Weren't sure if he had passed away because we could see movement. He had his fist clenched and we can see his elbow.
Gardner was executed at Utah State Prison in Draper on the 18th of June 2010 at 12:15 a.m. 5 volunteer marksmen with .30 caliber Winchester rifles fired from behind a slit in the wall. Asked for a final statement, he said, "I do not know." Kenneth Eugene Smith. Kenneth Smith was one of 2 hitmen hired by an Alabama pastor named Charles Sennett to kill his wife Elizabeth on the 18th of March, 1988. Sennett had run up gambling debts, taken out a large insurance policy on his wife, and started an affair. He paid Smith and John Forrest Parker $1,000 each to make the killing look like a burglary. Elizabeth Sennett was 45 years old. She was stabbed 8 times in the chest and neck inside the living room of her home in Colbert County. Blood was smeared around the house to fake a break-in. Charles Sennett shot himself a week later. Smith and Parker were both convicted. At Smith's retrial in 1996, the jury voted 11-1 for life. Under Alabama's judicial override law, the judge overruled the jury and imposed a death sentence. John Forrest Parker was executed by lethal injection in 2010. Smith's first execution date was the 17th of November, 2022. The execution team spent hours puncturing his arms, hands, and chest, attempting to find a vein. They failed. The death warrant expired at midnight, and they wheeled him back to his cell. Alabama tried again with a new method. On the 25th of January, 2024, at Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, a mask was strapped over his face, and pure nitrogen gas was pumped into it for roughly 15 minutes. It was the first nitrogen hypoxia execution in United States history. Witnesses reported him shaking and writhing on the gurney for at least 4 minutes.
Once the execution began, within a couple of minutes, Kenny began to violently push against the straps.
His last words were, "Tonight, Alabama caused humanity to take a step backward. I am leaving with love, peace, and light. Thank you for supporting me. Love all of you." Robert Charles Towery. On the 5th of September 1991, Robert Towery and an accomplice named Randy Barker drove to the home of 68-year-old Mark Jones in Scottsdale, Arizona. Jones was a business owner and a family friend. He had known Towery for years, had loaned him money, and had once helped him with a minor legal problem. When Towery knocked, Jones let him inside without hesitation. Towery and Barker tied him up with plastic zip ties. They tried to knock him out by injecting him with battery acid drawn into a syringe. When that failed, Towery strangled Jones to death with the zip ties around his neck. They loaded Jones's television, silverware, jewelry, and cash into a car and drove away. Towery was 27 years old and had a heroin habit. Barker was his roommate. Barker took a plea deal, testified against Towery, and was released in 2001.
I'm sorry that my actions of 20 years ago is bringing back all the pain of our past.
Towery spent 21 years on Arizona's death row. He kept a diary of his final 35 days on death watch that his attorneys published after his execution. He was executed by lethal injection at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence on the 8th of March, 2012. The execution team had trouble finding a vein and had to insert a second IV into his femoral artery near the groin. His last words were, "I would like to apologize to Mark's family and friends for what I did to them. I love my family. Potato, potato, potato." The last sentence was an inside joke with his young nephew, who was in the witness gallery. According to Towery's attorney, the nephew thought that was the sound a Harley-Davidson made when idling. It was a signal that everything was okay. Roger Keith Coleman. On the 10th of March, 1981, 9-year-old Wanda Faye McCoy was raped and nearly decapitated inside her home in the mining town of Grundy, Virginia. Her killer was her brother-in-law, Roger Keith Coleman. Coleman was 22 years old, a coal miner, and married to Wanda's older sister, Patricia. He had a prior conviction from 1977 for attempted rape of a woman in the same neighborhood. Her body was found by her husband when he came home from a night shift. The prosecution's case rested on early-stage forensic evidence, blood typing that matched a small pool of people, and hair and fiber matches. He was convicted in March 1982 after a 4-day trial. Coleman became a national symbol for the innocence movement. He appeared on the cover of Time magazine on the 18th of May 1992 under the headline, "This man might be innocent." He was profiled on Nightline, Amnesty International, and the Pope called for a stay. He passed all but one section of a polygraph on the day of his execution. He was executed in the electric chair at the Greensville Correctional Center on the 20th of May, 1992. His last words were, "An innocent man is going to be murdered tonight. When my innocence is proven, I hope America will realize the injustice of the death penalty, as all other civilized countries have. My last words are to the woman I love. Love is eternal. I love you, Sharon."
One thing I did notice was some smoke that started to come from his leg. This was during when the current was running through his system.
In January 2006, Governor Mark Warner ordered the first ever post-execution DNA testing in the United States. The results at the Center of Forensic Sciences in Toronto conclusively identified Coleman's semen inside Wanda McCoy. Donald Newbury. On the 13th of December 2000, 7 inmates at the Connolly Unit, south of San Antonio, staged the largest prison escape in Texas history. They overpowered 9 civilian workers and 3 guards in the prison boot factory, stole their uniforms, broke into the armory, and stole 16 firearms and roughly 250 rounds of ammunition. They drove out of the prison in a white maintenance truck. The Texas 7 spent the next 11 days hiding in a Motel 6 and planning bigger jobs. On Christmas Eve, they robbed an Oshman's sporting goods store in the Dallas suburb of Irving and made off with more than $70,000 in cash, plus 44 additional firearms and jewelry from employees. Officer Aubrey Hawkins, 29, responded to the alarm and drove around to the back of the store. All 7 men opened fire. He was shot 11 times, dragged out of his patrol car, and run over with a stolen SUV. He left behind a wife and a 9-year-old son on Christmas Eve. Donald Newbury, 52, was serving 99 years for a 1,998 aggravated robbery when he escaped. Ringleader George Rivas had been serving 17 consecutive life terms. The men were captured a month later in Woodland Park, Colorado, after a national manhunt fueled by an America's Most Wanted broadcast. One member, Larry Harper, shot himself before officers reached him. Newbury was executed by lethal injection at the Walls Unit in Huntsville on the 4th of February 2015. His last statement was a piece of poetry he had written himself, that each new indignity defeats only the body, pampering the spirit with obscure merit. I love you all, that is it. Humberto Leal Garcia.
Time of his arrest. The Obama administration wants to delay the execution for up to half a year.
On the 21st of May, 1994, 16-year-old Adria Sauceda was raped, tortured, and beaten to death at a house party in San Antonio, Texas. Her body was found the next morning in a vacant field. A stick had been jammed 15 inches into her body and left there. Humberto Leal Garcia Jr. was seen driving Adria away from the party in his 1985 Chevy Suburban. He returned home an hour later with fresh scratches across his back and blood on his clothes. His brother took him to the police. Leal was 21 years old, a car mechanic born in Monterrey, Mexico. He had lived in the United States since he was 2 years old on a green card. At no point after his arrest did San Antonio police tell him he had the right to contact the Mexican consulate under the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. He learned about the right 2 years later from a fellow inmate. His case became an international dispute. President Barack Obama asked Texas Governor Rick Perry for a reprieve. The Mexican government asked. The State Department asked. The United Nations asked. Legal experts argued consular help at arrest could have secured better counsel and saved him from the death penalty.
Su familia asegura que es inocente y que esperan verlo pronto. El tío de Humberto, quien vive en Monterrey, Nuevo León, de donde son originarios, dijo que incluso su sobrino sabe quién es el verdadero culpable.
The Supreme Court split 5-4 and let the execution proceed. Perry took no action. Leal was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit on the 7th of July 2011. His last words were, "I have hurt a lot of people. I take full blame for everything. I am sorry for what I did. Let's get this show on the road." As the drugs took effect, he shouted twice, "Viva Mexico! Viva Mexico!" Alan Lee Davis. On the 11th of May, 1982, Alan Lee Davis walked into a house on the west side of Jacksonville, Florida, carrying a .357 Magnum revolver. Inside was Nancy Weiler, 37, 3 months pregnant, and her 2 daughters, Christina, 9, and Catherine, 5. Her husband, a Westinghouse executive, was at work. Davis beat Nancy across the face and head with the pistol 25 times until she was unrecognizable. He tied Christina up and shot her twice in the face. Catherine tried to run down the hallway. He shot her once in the back and then beat her head in with the same gun. He was on parole for a 1,973 armed robbery conviction at the time of the murders. He had prior arrests for grand theft, stalking, and threatening a child. He was 6 feet tall and weighed 344 pounds. Prison guards called him Tiny. He spent 17 years on Florida's death row. Florida retired its original electric chair, Old Sparky, in the late 1990s, partly because prison officials worried the wooden frame might not support his weight. A new chair was built specifically to accommodate him. Davis was executed at Florida State Prison on the 8th of July, 1999. As the current was switched on, blood began pouring from behind the leather mask, soaking into a stain the size of a dinner plate across the front of his white shirt. Florida attributed it to a nosebleed. Witnesses reported he was still moving after the power was cut. When Warden James Crosby asked him for a final statement, Davis shook his head no and let out 2 unintelligible screams before the switch was thrown. He remains the last person executed by electric chair in Florida. Gary Gilmore. On the 19th of July, 1976, Gary Gilmore walked into a Sinclair gas station in Orem, Utah, and told 24-year-old attendant Max Jensen to lie face down on the bathroom floor. Jensen was a Mormon missionary and a law student with a pregnant wife. Gilmore shot him twice in the head. The next night, in a city center motel in Provo, he shot 25-year-old manager Benny Bushnell the same way. Bushnell was also a Mormon and had a pregnant wife at home. Both robberies netted Gilmore less than $200. He was arrested 24 hours later after his cousin's husband recognized his description and called the police.
Be the first in the nation since the U.S. Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional in 1972. Then it reversed itself.
Gilmore had spent 18 of his 36 years in prison for a string of robberies, assaults, and car thefts going back to his teens. He had been released from Oregon State Penitentiary on parole 3 months before the killings and had moved to Utah to try to build a life with his cousin's family. At sentencing, he told the judge he did not want to appeal. He wanted the execution to happen, and he wanted it fast.
I simply accepted a sentence that was given to me. I've accepted sentences all my life.
When the ACLU and his mother filed appeals on his behalf, he tried to stop them. He attempted suicide with his girlfriend, Nicole Baker, while waiting for the sentence to be carried out. His story became Norman Mailer's 1,979 Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Executioner's Song.
Especially the people of Utah, they want the death penalty, but they don't want executions. And when it became a reality that they might have to carry one out.
Gilmore was executed by firing squad at Utah State Prison in a converted cannery on the 17th of January, 1977 at 8:07 a.m. He was the first person executed in the United States since 1967. His last words to the warden were, "Let's do it." Joseph Paul Franklin. Between 1977 and 1980, Joseph Paul Franklin drove back and forth across the United States, shooting black men, interracial couples, and Jews at synagogues.
Arrested late Tuesday when FBI agents played a hunch that paid off.
He was convicted of 8 murders. He claimed responsibility for 22. His victims included 2 young cousins, 13-year-old Dante Evans Brown and 14-year-old Darrell Lane, whom he shot with a rifle from a railroad trestle in Cincinnati in 1980 as they walked to a convenience store. He also shot Vernon Jordan, the civil rights leader, outside a Fort Wayne hotel in 1980. Jordan survived. So did Larry Flynt, the publisher of Hustler magazine, whom Franklin paralyzed with a single rifle shot in Lawrenceville, Georgia, in 1978, after Hustler ran a photo spread featuring an interracial couple. He also shot 2 black joggers, Ted Fields and David Martin, in Salt Lake City, and killed Rebecca Bergstrom, a 22-year-old hitchhiker in Wisconsin. The murder that put him on death row was the sniper killing of 42-year-old Gerald Gordon, shot leaving a bar mitzvah reception at the Brith Sholem Kenneth Israel Synagogue in Richmond Heights, Missouri, on the 8th of October, 1977.
Yeah, I think it was a terrible thing to do, a terrible crime to commit against some people at a house of worship. It's just a...
Franklin was born James Clayton Vaughn Jr. in Mobile, Alabama. He changed his name in 1976, picking Joseph after Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. He joined the American Nazi Party and the Ku Klux Klan. He was captured in 1980 after robbing blood banks in Florida to fund his travels. He spent 33 years on Missouri's death row. Franklin was executed by lethal injection at Bonne Terre, Missouri, on the 20th of November 2013. Asked for a final statement, he declined to speak. Saddam Hussein.
Almost meeting his final moments rather than the former head of state.
Saddam Hussein ruled Iraq for 24 years, from 1979 until the American invasion in 2003. His government ordered the gassing of Kurdish civilians in the town of Halabja on the 16th of March, 1988, killing an estimated 5,000 people in a single afternoon with a mix of mustard gas and sarin. His forces killed an estimated 50,000 to 100,000 Kurds during the Anfal campaign. He ordered mass killings of Shia Iraqis after the 1991 uprising. He invaded Iran in 1980, starting an 8-year war that killed roughly 1 million people. He invaded Kuwait in 1990. The specific charge that carried his death sentence was smaller in scale.
قررت المحكمة الحكم على المدان صدام حسين المجيد بالإعدام شنقا حتى الموت.
On the 8th of July, 1982, his convoy was fired on while passing through the Shia town of Dujail. He ordered the deaths of 148 Shia men and boys from the village in the years that followed. He was captured by American forces on the 13th of December 2003, hiding in a hole on a farm outside Ad-Dawa near Tikrit. His trial ran from October 2005 to November 2006. Saddam was hanged at Camp Justice, an Iraqi army base in Baghdad, in the pre-dawn hours of the 30th of December 2006, on the first day of Eid al-Adha. He refused a hood. He carried a Quran under his arm. As the noose was placed around his neck, Shia guards in the room chanted the name of the cleric Muqtada al-Sadr in his face.
Shouting, God is great, and that the nation would live on, and that Palestine was Arab.
He began reciting the Shahada, the Muslim declaration of faith. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. He got through it once and started it a second time. The trapdoor opened before he could finish.